Chapter 8, February 23rd, 2000, 11:48 p.m., slumped to the floor. Gabe and Ashley stepped out of the hospital, the quiet night pressing against them like a weighted blanket. The case had ended too cleanly, too quietly, leaving a residual unease that clung to Gabe, like smoke. John's eerie calm replayed in his mind, each measured word laced with an undertone he couldn't place, as though he were privy to a truth they weren't meant to know. They reached the edge of the parking lot, the city hum muted by distance. Gabe slowed his steps. "That guy, John," he said quietly. "I've seen him before." Ashley didn't look at him. "What? Where?" Gabe nodded. "He wanted me to know it was him. John picked my pocket in broad daylight and said my name. That's not random. And back there in the room, he looked at you like he knew exactly which buttons to press." Ashley flicked Ash to the pavement, his eyes fixed forward. "Maybe he did. Guys like him collect secrets. Power comes from knowing what no one else does." Gabe turned toward him, not letting it drop. "So, what's his secret, Ashley? Because I've got a feeling you know more than you're letting on." Ashley was quiet for a beat too long. Then he took a drag, exhaled slowly, and said with careful calm, "Whatever he used to be, he's a dying man in a hospital bed now. We'll talk to him again tomorrow after they move him to the secure wing. Tonight? We got him. Let's leave it at that." Gabe didn't respond. He just nodded slowly, though his gaze lingered on Ashley longer than before. "You heading home?" he asked. Ashley shrugged, voice a bit rougher. "Yeah, think I need a quiet night. You?" "Same," Gabe said. "Been a long day." They stood in silence, the city around them winding down. Gabe turned toward his car, glancing over his shoulder once as Ashley walked the other way. "Take care, Ash," he called out. Ashley gave a brief wave. "Get some rest, we'll be back here in the morning." As they disappeared in opposite directions, neither of them could shake the feeling that something was still lurking in the dark, unfinished. Back in the hospital, an unnatural quiet blanketed the corridor. Overhead fixtures gave off a pale, unwavering light, casting sterile reflections across the polished floor. The air felt suspended as if time itself had paused. Nurses mid-stride, machines humming softly in the background, all caught in a breath that hadn't been released. Karen moved with precise grace beside the two guards escorting John Doe. Her expression was unreadable, cool, composed, as if carved from calm. John, by contrast, looked barely tethered to his body. His arms swayed limply with each reluctant step, his shoes dragging slightly, the sound oddly loud in the hush. Fear clung to him like a second skin. John turned his head, a slow, deliberate movement, his grin sharp and venomous. "Still pretending, Karen." His voice was a blade cutting with each syllable. "How's Brad holding up these days? Oh, wait. Dead, isn't he? And you, running off with Ashley like the loyal soldier you are. Guess loyalty's not really your thing, is it?" Karen froze mid-step, the name twisting through her mind like a serrated edge. Her expression barely shifted, but something in her stance hardened, bracing against the weight of what he'd just said. "You don't get to say his name." Her voice was low, measured, but beneath it something sharper stirred. The guards tightened their grips on his arms, but John just laughed, a dark, mocking sound that cut through the silence. In a flash, John lunged. His movements were sharp and calculated. With a swift, brutal twist, he wrenched free from the guards' grips, his fists connecting with their jaws one after the other. Thud! The first guard hit the ground, his head dangling to the side. The second guard attempted to retaliate, but John spun and struck, his punch landing with a sickening crack against the guard's nose. The guard stumbled backward, dazed, before crumpling to the floor. Karen's eyes narrowed, her stance shifting as she prepared herself. "You've got guts," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Her frame was slight, almost delicate, but the tension in her body betrayed a strength few could see. John laughed, his fists clenched. "Come on then, show me what you got." Karen moved first, her fist cutting through the air with lightning speed. Wham! Her punch connected with his chin, and John staggered back, surprise flashing in his eyes. She was stronger than she looked, much stronger. He regained his balance quickly, a grin spreading across his face as he adjusted his stance. John threw a punch toward her face, but she ducked, her movements fluid and precise. She struck back, landing a blow to his side, and he grunted, doubling over slightly. But he was resilient. He swung again, his fist barely missing her jaw as she dodged, pivoting on her heel to create distance between them. The fight intensified, each movement rapid, calculated. Smack. John's fist collided with Karen's side and a sharp pain jolted through her, but she kept her stance, gritting her teeth. She retaliated with a powerful kick to his knee, forcing him to stagger. But John was insistent. He lunged forward, his hands closing around her wrists. His grip was ironclad, and Karen felt a surge of pain as he twisted, forcing her back against the wall. She could feel the cold surface pressing against her spine, her heart pounding in her chest. "Not so tough now, are you?" He sneered, his face inches from hers. Karen met his gaze, her eyes burning with defiance. She drove her knee into his abdomen hard. He gasped, releasing his hold just enough for her to break free. She stepped forward, swinging her fist into his jaw, the impact sending a jolt up her arm. But John absorbed the hit, barely flinching, and countered with a brutal punch to her ribs that sent her reeling. Karen's breath caught, pain radiating from her side. She stumbled, her vision blurring slightly as she tried to regain her balance. She was strong, stronger than most, but John's brutal, unyielding strength was beginning to wear her down. He seized the moment, lunging forward and grabbing her by the shoulders. With a savage twist, he slammed her against the wall again, his grip tightening. Crack. Her shoulder hit the wall, pain shooting through her arm. She struggled, but he was overpowering her, his weight pressing her down. John leaned in close, his presence suffocating, his breath hot against Karen's ear. The scalding heat of it sent a shiver down her spine, though she kept her face impassive. "You think this ends here?" he whispered, his voice low and venomous, each word curling in the air like smoke from a dying fire. His tone was deliberate, every syllable heavy with intent, pressing like a weight that promised to leave a mark. Karen didn't flinch, though her fingers twitched instinctively at her sides, aching to move. Her gaze flicked downward. The moment stretched, unnatural, as John raised his hand, fingers toying with something small, metallic, a coin. Its surface gleamed in the dim hospital light, revealing a faint, unfamiliar pattern etched into its face. The design shifted subtly as it spun, the details elusive, dancing just out of focus. John chuckled softly, a sound that carried the jagged edge of broken glass. "This isn't over," he hissed, the coin stopping mid-spin as he held it up, tilting it so the faint etching glinted in the harsh light. "What you saw tonight, that was a prologue, Karen, a message." He paused, his lips curling into a smile that felt more like a wound. "I'm coming for it all." Karen forced herself to meet his gaze, her own eyes narrowing. "You're a coward," she shot back, her voice low but steady. "All you've got is riddles and theatrics." His grin widened, cold and sharp like the edge of a guillotine. "Call it what you want, but you'll see soon enough. You'll wish it ended here, Special Agent." He pulled back slightly, the coin vanishing into his palm as though it had never been there. Before Karen could respond, John turned sharply, his movements as fluid and deliberate as oil slicking across the water. Crack. With all of John's strength, he hit Karen in the face. The echo of his punch reverberated down the hallway, leaving behind an air that was heavy and charged, like the moment after a lightning strike. Karen's breath hitched as her gaze lingered on the space where he'd stood, the words he'd left behind curling in her mind like a ghostly whisper she couldn't quite shake. She clenched her fists, the faint sound of her own breathing the only reminder that she was still in control. Karen's vision dimmed, her strength waning as she felt herself slipping into unconsciousness. John straightened, looking down at her, a smirk tugging at his lips as he watched her slump to the floor, defeated. Chapter 9, February 24th, 2000, 9:18 a.m. It was personal. Gabe stormed through the precinct doors, each step hitting the polished tiles with clipped urgency. The usual din of phones and distant chatter blurred behind him, replaced by the electric static of unease gnawing at his gut. Overhead, fluorescent lights cast a hard, sterile wash across the hallway, bright but cold, like an interrogation lamp turned on the world. His eyes locked onto the frosted glass at the end of the corridor. Captain Marshall stood behind it, a dark silhouette carved in tension. He was rarely in this early unless something had gone sideways, and Gabe knew instinctively this wasn't just a paperwork reprimand or another note on his record. This was something worse, something urgent. Another figure stood beside the captain, rigid, arms tucked into coat pockets. Even blurred by the glass, Gabe recognized the stance immediately. Ashley. That unshakable stillness, the kind that came before a storm. Whatever happened, it was already bad. Gabe hesitated for just a beat, focusing on the muffled voices leaking through the door. Then he stepped forward, pushing it open. "Detective Gabe, where were you last night?" Captain Marshall's voice cut through the quiet of the room, authoritative yet laced with a hint of frustration. Gabe's hand went to the back of his neck, rubbing it as he searched for the right words. I must have passed out after yesterday's case. Forgot to check my alarm," he admitted, knowing that wasn't going to win him any points today. The captain's gaze didn't waver, but a hint of something passed over his face. Disappointment, maybe, or even worry. "Karen was ambushed during the transfer last night," Captain Marshall began, his voice steady but edged with frustration. "John Doe got the jump on her, took her down." He leaned back slightly, his fingers steepling under his chin. The words hit Gabe like a gut punch, his breath stalling in his throat. Karen, the one they all leaned on, the one who never let herself lose, had been taken down. His stomach churned at the thought. He cast a glance at Ashley, who stood like a statue, his jaw clenched so tight it looked ready to crack. But beneath the hardened mask, Gabe caught it, a flicker of guilt, raw and unspoken. "What about the guards?" Gabe asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The captain's voice remained steady, though an edge of worry seeped into it. "They were taken out as well. Quickly, John Doe is on the run." Gabe's hands clenched, frustration simmering just under the surface. "Did he take anything?" Ashley asked, his voice controlled but cold. Captain Marshall's expression tightened, his nod almost imperceptible. "No," he said slowly, his voice measured. "He didn't take anything. Just left Karen with a message. We haven't fully decoded yet." He paused, his gaze shifting briefly to the files on his desk, fingers drumming once against their edges before calming. Karen was conscious enough to confirm it when the unit picked her up. There was another pause, his jaw tightening as if weighing his following words. "She's banged up. Pretty bad." His tone dipped, almost as if speaking too much would unravel something. "She is resting. Out of commission for a few days or weeks." Ashley's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to the floor, but Gabe caught the trace of something else in his partner's eyes, a mix of regret and a steely determination. He knew Ashley felt responsible for her. They all did, in a way, but Ashley took it personally. The captain closed the files in front of him with a definitive thud. "We have ground units combing the area, but he's slippery, and without Karen's presence, our processing speed's going to take a hit. We'll be backed up, especially if he pulls more stunts like this." Gabe exchanged a glance with Ashley. They'd seen Karen handle herself against some of the most dangerous criminals, and the thought of John Doe barely scraping by in a fight with her left Gabe uneasy. If he'd only managed to overpower her, he was desperate, which made him even more dangerous. Ashley straightened, his voice quieter but edged with something sharp. "Where is she?" It wasn't just a question. It was a promise. "At home," the sergeant replied, his tone softening slightly. "The doctor advised rest and she's under watch, but it's not going to be enough if John decides to double back." Gabe's voice cut through the heavy air, sharp with conviction. "We'll handle it." His eyes locked with the captain's, the steel in his tone leaving no room for doubt. "No one else gets hurt." It was a silent agreement that nothing, not even someone as slippery as John Doe, would get away with this. At the doorway, Gabe's hand tightened around the frame, his knuckles whitening as he turned back. Ashley's gaze met his, dark and solid, the silence between them heavy with unspoken vows. The weight of the room pressed down on them, an unshakable reminder that this wasn't just another case, it was personal. Chapter 10, March 28, 2000, 8:37 a.m. Only he could hear. The bullpen felt wrong, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful but suffocating. It settled into the space like dust, clinging to skin and thought alike. Overhead, the fluorescent lights gave off a low, stuttering hum, not quite steady, not quite gone, as if the building itself was holding back a breath. Desks that once buzzed with life, half-drained coffee cups, cluttered folders, scrawled notes, now sat still, like crime scenes after the detectives had cleared out. Gabe sat stiffly at his desk, the muscles in his jaw twitching with restrained energy. The files in front of him lay open but untouched, their edges curled from too many sleepless hands. Karen's voice, usually the metronome of the bullpen, sharp, measured grounding, was gone, and in its place was something colder. He felt it everywhere. Across from him, Ashley sat low in his chair, uncharacteristically still. The pen he usually spun between his fingers lay motionless beside a half-crumpled case report. His eyes, darker today, more focused, scanned the bullpen like he was expecting someone to reappear, but no one did. The door creaked open and Kayla Thorne walked in, her sharp heels clicking against the tiled floor. Gabe and Ashley looked up, their expressions unreadable but edged with an unspoken wariness. Kayla's presence was unfamiliar, and it was hard to welcome the change in a room that had just lost one of its pillars. "Morning," Kayla said, her voice softer than usual, almost tentative. She lingered at the edge of their desks, the tray in her hands trembling just slightly. The smell of fresh coffee curled into the air, a small attempt at normalcy in a room that seemed allergic to it. Kayla's auburn hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, but the faint strain in her expression betrayed her usual composed demeanor. Ashley's voice cut through the silence, sharp but lacking its usual edge. "Coffee delivery, huh? Guess this is the winning hearts and minds part of the job." He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, but there was no real fight behind his words, just the faint echo of bitterness. Kayla gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "Figured you could use a pick-me-up. Heard it's been a rough week." Gabe took one of the cups without a word, his fingers brushing against the warm paperboard. He stared at it for a moment before setting it down on the desk. "Thanks," he muttered, his voice flat. Kayla's gaze flicked between the two men, her usual sharpness tempered by a trace of uncertainty. "I've gone through Karen's notes. She's meticulous. I'll do my best to fill in, but I know I'm not her." Ashley's eyes lingered on her for a moment, his voice low and even. "No one's asking you to be her. Just know what you're walking into and don't blink when it starts staring back." Gabe shot him a look, but Ashley didn't flinch. His eyes stayed on Kayla, steady and unblinking. "Just so we're clear, Karen's not support staff. She's one of us, and she's at home because someone thought she was the weak link." Kayla's expression softened and she nodded. "I understand. I'll keep things running here until she's back. Just let me know how I can help." Gabe exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "She'll be back," he said, almost to himself. Then louder, "All right, let's get to it. These cases aren't going to solve themselves." Kayla handed over a notepad, her handwriting neat and precise. "I flagged the key points from the files. I'll be at my desk if you need me." As she walked away, the room seemed to close in again, the brief moment of levity vanishing like a spark snuffed out too soon. Gabe opened the first file, his eyes scanning the words with practiced efficiency. 5 cases, he said quietly. 5 stories. Let's see what they tell us. Ashley leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. His usual bravado was muted, replaced by a grim determination. Let's hope one of them actually talks. The 2 detectives settled in, their focus sharpening as they delved into the files. Outside, the city continued its restless hum, but inside the precinct, time felt suspended. Karen's absence was a wound they wouldn't acknowledge aloud, but it bled into every glance, every word, every silence. And as the first file came to life in their hands, the snapshots of 5 interviews began to unfold, each one a thread in a tapestry they couldn't yet see, but one that would eventually lead them to the truth they were chasing. Case 1. Mr. Smith's boots tapped against the floor as he leaned back in his chair, his Texas drawl filling the room. Y'all think you got me? Good luck with that. He smirked, defiance in every gesture. Gabe remained silent, his gaze fixed, while Ashley leaned forward, his elbows on the table. You don't have to admit a damn thing, Patrick, Ashley said, sliding 2 silver coins across the table with deliberate precision. But you do have a choice. Call your lawyer, take the coins, or talk to us. Patrick's smirk faltered, his hand hovering over the coins for a moment before he snatched them up, his confidence cracking just enough for his eyes to dart toward the door. Outside, Kayla stood waiting, her dark ash dress catching the light as her heels echoed faintly in the hallway. Patrick hesitated but followed her, disappearing into the corridor. Case 2. Mr. Broderick's hands twitched on the table, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Sweat dotted his brow as Gabe leaned in slightly. Daniel, it doesn't matter how bad it got. This isn't about punishment. This is about clarity. I didn't, Daniel started, his voice breaking as his gaze dropped to the table. He shook his head, his shoulders trembling. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Ashley slid 2 silver coins across the table without a word. Daniel's wide eyes fixed on the coins, then lifted to Ashley, searching for an answer in his stony expression. He picked them up with shaking hands, clenching them tightly as though they might disappear. The door creaked open and Kayla appeared, her expression unreadable. She motioned slightly and Daniel rose, his legs unsteady as he followed her into the dimly lit hallway. Case 3. Mr. Wilson's gold pin gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light as he leaned back in his chair, exuding an air of superiority. This is a waste of time, he said, his tone smooth and dismissive. My lawyer will have this sorted out before the ink dries on your paperwork. Ashley's lips twitched into a faint, humorless smile. You can call your lawyer, Riley. That's your right. But there's no walking away from this. Riley's confident veneer wavered, his jaw tightening. Ashley reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 silver coins, placing them deliberately on the table. Take them, he said, leaning back as Riley's hand hesitated over the coins. When Riley finally took them, his eyes flicked toward the door. Kayla stood there, her dark heels clicking softly as she led him into the corridor. Her presence was a quiet authority that silenced any retort he might have had. Case 4. Mr. Durile sat hunched over and his massive frame curled inward as though he could make himself smaller. His hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles were white. I messed up, he muttered, his voice barely audible. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. Gabe's expression softened slightly, his voice low and even. We all make mistakes. It's what makes us human, Tony. What matters now is how you move forward. Ashley placed 2 silver coins in front of him, the metallic clink breaking the charged silence. Tony's gaze dropped to the coins, his breathing shallow as he reached out, his calloused fingers trembling slightly. Kayla waited in the doorway with her arms crossed. Tony rose slowly, his broad shoulders slumping as he followed her out, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. "You will hear from my lawyer," he said with a sense of confidence he never had during their interrogation. Case 5. Mrs. Choi's eyes burned with anger as she sat across from Gabe and Ashley, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You're wasting your time," she spat, her tone sharp. "This is all bullshit and you know it." Ashley's expression didn't waver. "You're right," he said calmly. "This could all be bullshit, but that doesn't mean it's over." Jamie's glare faltered, confusion flashing across her face. Without breaking eye contact, Ashley slid 2 silver coins across the table. "Call your lawyer," he said, his voice steady and deliberate. "We're done here." Jamie's hand hovered over the coins, her jaw tightening. She snatched them up, rising from her chair with a sharp motion. At the door, Kayla stood waiting with a frustrated look on her face. She was much different from Karen. Karen always showed little or no emotion when picking up the suspects. Jamie brushed past her, her steps quick and angry as the door clicked shut behind her. Ashley lit a cigarette, the tip flaring orange as he took a slow drag. Without looking back, he started toward the door. "I'm going to get a drink. You coming, Gabe?" Gabe glanced at him, closing the door gently behind him as he prepared to follow. But just as he looked down at his feet, a figure loomed close by, causing him to jolt slightly. Captain Marshall stood next to the door, holding a file in his right hand, tapping it with his left. The dim hallway lights shadowed his face. "Gabe, Ashley." The captain's voice was low but insistent. "We just got this in. Can you two handle it?" Gabe took a deep breath, relaxing his stance, though Ashley's eyebrow quirked as he took another drag, unfazed. "Sure, Cap. What have we got?" Gabe asked, rubbing a hand over his face, sensing a long night ahead. The Captain Marshal handed him the file, his gaze steady. "Picked her up a few hours ago. She's waiting for you in room 2131. Ashley exhaled a thin line of smoke, the corner of his mouth twitching into a slight grimace. "Room 2131. Man, I hate that room. Too clean and somehow dirty at the same time." The captain's expression remained impassive. "You'll get over it," he replied flatly before turning and walking away. With a sigh, Gabe and Ashley headed down the hallway until they reached room 2131. As they neared the door, muffled shouting seeped through the walls. Ashley shot Gabe a look, half a smirk playing on his lips, laced with a hint of annoyance. "Well, here we go," Ashley muttered, flicking his cigarette into a nearby ashtray. Gabe pushed open the door and they were hit by the harsh, blinding lights that illuminated the freshly painted pale brown walls and the stark white floors. The sharp smell of paint lingered, barely masking the underlying scent of body odor, giving the room a strangely artificial feel. Inside, a woman sat slouched in a metal chair, her posture defiant yet weary. The bright pink fabric of her dress clung to her frame, too tight in places, as though it were never meant to fit quite right. Her hands tapped against the cold metal table, chipped nails clicking in a rhythm that betrayed her irritation. Her eyes darted toward the mirror, then back to the detectives, a flicker of wariness masked beneath a layer of bravado. Her fingers, bearing the telltale signs of hard living, tapped irritably against the table, her gaze flashing as she noticed them enter. She immediately shot up, crossing her arms. "I'm not talking to any of you," she yelled, her voice echoing in the sterile space. "I want my—" Before she could finish, Gabe raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. "Listen, maybe we can help you, but you have to trust us. Just give us a chance to hear you out." Her eyes darted between the two detectives and an uncertain glint crossed her face. Her defenses lowered just a notch, though she kept her arms tightly crossed over her large chest. A two-way. Mirror on the right wall reflected the tension between the woman and the detectives, showing every stiff movement and flash of defiance. Ashley shifted to the corner, his shoulders slack in a way that seemed almost deliberate. His gaze didn't quite land on anything, flitting past Gabe and Candy like a shadow without substance. To Gabe, it was as though Ashley had stepped out of the room entirely, his presence reduced to the faint metallic clink of the coins in his pocket, a sound that felt like an anchor in a rising tide of unease. Gabe stepped closer and whispered, "You okay?" Ashley stood still, his hand in his pocket, fingers playing with the coins. Without a response, Gabe took the lead in the interrogation. He pulled out a chair beside the woman and gestured to it. "Mind if I sit?" "Fine," she muttered, "but I'm still not talking." "Let's start simple," Gabe said gently, his voice low and steady. "What's your name?" "Candy," she replied defiantly, her eyes narrowing. Gabe flipped open the file. "Our file says Megan Porter. That sound familiar?" Her defiant expression faltered slightly. "How do you know that? I haven't been called that name in years." "Well, how would you like us to address you?" Gabe asked, his tone calm. She looked down, a hint of sorrow crossing her face. "Candy. Megan died a long time ago." "All right, Candy," Gabe replied softly, nodding. "Do you know why you're here?" The woman's shoulders stiffened, her gaze hardening again. "No, and like I said, I'm not talking." Gabe leaned in slightly, his tone gentle yet insistent. "We get it. That's fine. But we've seen people like you before. People who think they're on their own, backed into a corner." He paused, his eyes steady on hers. "We don't want to see that happen. We can help, but only if you let us." Candy hesitated, her jaw clenching as she studied their faces. Her bravado wavered, and her arms loosened slightly, dropping to her sides. "You think you can help?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Gabe nodded. "We know your story, Candy. Prostitution isn't a path most people choose freely. Our file says your uncle sold you into it, and we know the police have picked you up a few times, but you refused help every time." Candy's voice wavered, her hands gripping the hem of her dress so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "He told me if I talked, they'd kill my dog. My dog. He's all I have left." Her gaze dropped, the memory dragging her down with it. "My dad, he was strong, you know. He could fix anything except himself. One day, just like that, he was gone." Her voice cracked and she sucked in a sharp breath. "And Mom, she tried. God, she tried, but I could see it in her eyes. She was already half gone. I wasn't enough to keep her here." Her hands twisted the hem of her dress, her knuckles white. "She took her own life, and Her voice faltered, her eyes shimmering. "I think it was my fault. I broke them. I broke their hearts. I broke everything." She took a shuddering breath. "Look at me. I used to be so beautiful. I had this smile that lit up a room, you know. Back in high school, I had friends, boys who'd line up to take me out." Her voice broke as she looked away, trying to hold back tears. "But when I needed them, they were all gone." Gabe's voice was steady. "What do you remember about that night?" "I was meeting a John, wanted to get high. We partied hard." Candy's fingers trembled as she gripped the hem of her dress again in nervousness, her knuckles whitening. "I don't remember much," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I remember the feeling." She swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the table, but she wasn't in the sterile interrogation room anymore. She was back there. The air reeked of stale smoke and cheap cologne, the bedsheets damp with sweat. Hollow, slurred laughter drifted through the dim motel room, curling around the bitter sting of crushed pills and bottom-shelf whiskey. Her limbs floated, her head heavy. The world tilted. Then, darkness. A voice broke through the silence, measured, low, almost too calm for the urgency underneath. A man hunched over the motel phone, his fingers dialing with mechanical precision. "Come on, pick up," he murmured, not begging, just waiting, like he already knew what came next. Candy's breath hitched, snapping her back to the present. Candy shivered, her fingers clenching together. "Next thing I knew, I woke up in the hospital and they brought me here." Ashley stood in the corner, barely moving, not just lost in thought, removed, like a man standing at the edge of something only he could see. Gabe tried to get his attention, his voice low. "Ashley, do you have some change?" It took a moment for Ashley to respond, blinking back to the present. Yeah, sorry." He handed 2 coins to Gabe, his gaze distant. The bright lights reflected off the mirror, casting sharp lines across Candy's face, catching the flicker of fear in her eyes as she glanced from Ashley to Gabe. She looked down, weighed down by her thoughts. Finally, Candy spoke, her voice barely a whisper as Gabe held out the 2 coins. "You handled this job well, like nothing ever phases you." Gabe held out the coins, their silver surfaces catching the fluorescent light, reflecting it like fractured mirrors. "Just because we carry it well doesn't mean it's light," he said, his voice steady, though something flickered behind his eyes. "These aren't just coins, Candy, they're choices, symbols of what comes next. They're yours now. Take them." Candy reached out, and as she took the coins, it was as if a weight lifted from her. The tension in her shoulders softened, her expression easing as she pocketed the coins. The sound of heels echoed down the hallway outside, calm, measured, almost comforting. The door opened and 2 guards entered, helping Candy to her feet. Behind them stood Kayla, her tailored dress catching the light in a way that softened its dark ash color. What once seemed somber now appeared almost pale as the line between shadow and light had blurred. Candy's wary gaze settled on her, something unreadable shifting behind her expression. For a moment, the hard edge in her demeanor gave way to something quieter, cautious but not closed, as if Kayla's quiet poise offered a glimpse of something stable in a world that had long forgotten how to be. "Girl, you'd make a killing in my line of work," Candy quipped, her voice carrying a bittersweet edge. It was the first time Gabe had ever seen Kayla smile. Kayla simply extended her arm. "This way," she said softly, gesturing to the left. "Do you have anyone to call?" As the door shut behind them, Gabe turned sharply toward Ashley, his voice low but edged with concern. "What's going on, Ash? You've been somewhere else all day." He searched his partner's face for a crack in the mask, but Ashley's eyes remained locked on the wall, his fingers still turning the coins in his pocket, their faint clinking a sharp counterpoint to the silence. "Talk to me," Gabe pressed, the weight in his tone mirroring the heaviness in the air. But Ashley didn't answer, his silence louder than any words he could have spoken. Gabe watched him carefully, the unease coiling in his gut tightening with every silent second. "Ashley," Gabe said, sharper this time, his patience wearing thin. But Ashley just kept rolling the coins between his fingers, click, 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 like he was waiting for something, or maybe trying to drown something out. His fingers focused on tracing the coins as if they held the answer to a question only he could hear. Chapter 11, March 29th, 2000, 12:17. A.M. Too heavy to share. As the door closed with a soft thud, Gabe stopped in his tracks, turning sharply toward Ashley. The flickering hallway light carved jagged shadows across Ashley's face, emphasizing the deep grooves of exhaustion. His hollowed cheeks and bloodshot eyes mirrored the kind of weariness that no amount of sleep could erase. "What the hell was that back there?" Gabe's voice was low but firm, brimming with concern. "You're not yourself, Ash. What's going on?" Ashley didn't meet his gaze. His hand slipped into his pocket, the faint clink of coins breaking the tense silence. "Nothing, I'm fine," he muttered, his tone distant. "Just tired." "Don't give me that, Ash. I know when you're lying hell I could write the book on it by now. You're supposed to be the steady one here, the father figure, not me." Ashley sighed, rolling his shoulders as though trying to shake off a heavyweight. "Just need to get something to drink," he said finally, voice low. "It's been a long night." Gabe studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's hit Melissa's bar. Food, drinks, my treat tonight. But you're not getting out of talking that easily," he added with a faint grin, hoping to lighten the mood. As they made their way through the quiet streets, Ashley pulled off toward a small convenience store, the bell overhead giving a soft chime as he entered. Gabe waited near the door as Ashley grabbed a pack of cigarettes. On his way to the counter, Ashley's gaze caught on a man in a rumpled jacket, his arms loaded with candy bars. The man's hollow eyes and jittery hands told a story Ashley had seen too many times before. "You might want to rethink that," Ashley said, his voice softer than expected. The man looked up, startled, as Ashley added, "What you're not changing is what you are choosing." The man hesitated, the weight of the words hanging between them. "Thanks, I guess," he murmured, his movements slowing as he placed a few candy bars back on the shelf. Gabe laughed, crossing his arms as Ashley walked over. "You know, most people don't appreciate unsolicited wisdom. Shocked that guy just didn't tell you off." Ashley shrugged, pocketing his smokes. "Sometimes people need a nudge. Never know what might stick." The familiar neon sign flickered above Melissa's bar, casting a pale blue glow onto the rain-slick pavement. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of aged whiskey and fried food, the warmth of the place pressing against the cold night they carried with them. The low hum of conversation mingled with the clink of glasses, a fragile rhythm of normalcy. Worn leather booths lined the walls, their edges cracked and peeling as if bearing the weight of too many secrets whispered over too many drinks. They slid into a booth in the back corner. Melissa, with her knowing smile and sharp eyes, spotted them immediately. She raised a hand in greeting, wiping her hands on a bar towel before making her way over. "Look who finally showed up," she teased, her tone warm. "Thought you boys had forgotten about me." Ashley nodded, giving her a faint smile while Gabe held up two fingers and pointed to the corner booth. "The usual, Mel. Throw in a basket of fries while you're at it?" Melissa chuckled. "Don't I always?" She gave Ashley a once-over, noticing his weariness, and arched an eyebrow. "You okay, Ashley?" He looked up at her, a hint of gratitude in his gaze. "Yeah, just a long night." She gave his shoulder a light squeeze before heading back to the bar. In moments, she returned, setting down 2 whiskeys and a basket of fries between them. "Here you go, you two," she said with a grin. She lingered for a beat, watching the way Gabe and Ashley settled into their usual rhythm, even in silence. "You know, you two have only been working together for what, a little over a year now? Feels like forever. You've got that unspoken thing down." Ashley didn't respond, just reached for his drink, fingers tightening around the glass. Gabe offered a small smirk, but his eyes flicked toward his partner, concern still tugging at the edges of his expression. "Do you need anything else?" "No, thank you, Mel. That'll do for now," Gabe replied with a quick smile. She nodded, leaving them in the quiet pocket of the bar. "I'm just overdoing my bar things. If you need anything, let me know." Gabe nodded, and Ashley took a sip of his drink, staring into his glass, silent for a long moment. Gabe leaned forward, his voice softer this time. "Come on, Ash. I'm not just your partner. I'm your friend. You don't have to carry this alone. Talk to me." Ashley sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's like every case stays with me," Ashley murmured, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "Every face, every choice we try to give them. Some nights it's like they're all there, staring back at me, waiting for answers I can't give." He exhaled sharply, his hand tightening around the glass. And tonight, seeing Candy, it brought it all back, like it wasn't just her sitting there, it was everyone. He paused, searching for the right words. And tonight, it was just more. Gabe took a sip, letting Ashley gather his thoughts without pressing. "It's like every person we see in that room has a choice, right from wrong, wrong from right," Ashley continued, voice low. "And somehow it's on us to help them see it, to give them that nudge. But sometimes I wonder, are we really helping them, or just delaying what's coming for them?" Gabe's expression softened. "You're second-guessing yourself because you care, Ashley. That's why we do this, to give people a chance to see if they'll take it. And yeah, sometimes they don't, but that's on them, not on you." Ashley let out a weary chuckle. "Funny, coming from you, what are you, Batman now?" Gabe shrugged, a slight grin crossing his face. "Just because I carry it well doesn't mean it's not heavy." They shared a quiet laugh, the warmth of the whiskey easing the tension between them. After a moment, Gabe leaned in, his tone conspiratorial. "So," he said, "anything else weighing on that mystical head of yours?" Ashley hesitated, fingers idly toying with his glass. "There's this pull," Ashley began, his voice barely more than a whisper, like he feared the words might summon something he couldn't face. "It's like we're just pieces on a board, moved, placed, sacrificed, all for a game we don't even understand. And when I saw Candy tonight, it wasn't just her. It was a reminder that maybe we're not as in control as we think." His gaze flicked to Gabe, his eyes clouded with something unspoken. "You ever feel like that? Like we're not in control of any of this?" Gabe nodded slowly. "What is it? Maybe I can help." They sat back, each lost in thought as the familiar clink of glasses and low hum of conversations settled around them. Melissa lingered near the bar, her sharp eyes darting to their booth every so often. Concern flickered across her face, but she stayed back, carefully polishing a glass. In the corner, Gabe studied him carefully, the silence between them stretching taut as a wire. The coins in Ashley's pocket clinked faintly, the sound carrying more weight than it should. For a moment, Gabe thought he saw something shift in Ashley's eyes, something dark and unknowable. And then it was gone, leaving only the quiet, brittle tension of a partner holding on to secrets too heavy to share. Chapter 12. March 29th, 2000, 1:05 a.m. that had been lost. The city murmured beyond the bar's walls, its restless energy pressing in at the edges of their solitude. Inside, the world felt smaller, tucked into dim corners and softened by the steady hum of conversation. The air carried the scent of aged whiskey and worn leather, a familiar contrast to the chaos they waded through daily. Gabe sat motionless, his drink untouched, while Ashley stared into his whiskey, tracing slow circles along the rim of his glass. One was anchored in the present, the other caught somewhere in the past. The low glow of flickering neon cast fractured light across their table, turning reflections in their glasses into shifting amber ghosts. The occasional clink of ice against glass punctuated the quiet, filling the spaces where words should have been. Ashley exhaled, shoulders tense, his grip on the tumbler tightening as though bracing against a memory. Whether it was the drink dulling his defenses or Gabe's quiet, steady presence, something in him finally gave way, the weight he carried shifting just enough to let something through. Gabe leaned forward, his voice low, cutting through the ambient buzz of the bar. "Ash, I've seen you carry a lot, but tonight's different. What's eating at you?" Ashley's fingers tightened around his glass, the condensation trailing down like tiny rivers. His voice was quite distant when he finally spoke. "You've heard me talk about Brad before, haven't you?" The name hung in the air, heavy and unresolved, like a half-finished story waiting to be told. "Yeah," Gabe replied, nodding. "I remember the name, never met him, seen the name on a few old files." Ashley stared down at his drink, his voice softened by an edge of pain. "Brad was my partner before you. He wasn't just a guy with broad shoulders and a frame that could block out the sun. He was the kind of person who made you feel like nothing bad could touch you if he were around. Solid as the ground beneath your feet, dependable in a way that made you believe in the impossible. But he wasn't just a wall, but a light, too. The guy could walk into a room and leave it warmer just by being there." Gabe listened quietly, sensing the depth behind Ashley's words. Sounds like someone worth knowing. A faint, bittersweet smile tugged at Ashley's lips. He was, but Brad wasn't just all muscle. He had this way of putting people at ease. He'd walk into a room and people would start laughing before he even said anything, always cracking jokes and always having a story. He could bring anyone out of a bad mood. But he had a sense for when things were serious. He could read a room better than anyone I've ever known. Gabe nodded, letting Ashley's words hang in the air before gently asking, "So, what happened to him?" Ashley's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to the worn grain of the wooden table. He exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible beneath the low hum of the bar. "We were on a case together," he said, his voice quieter now, as if speaking too loudly might unravel something he'd kept stitched together for too long. One of those days where everything felt routine, until it wasn't. He paused, his fingers idly tracing the condensation on his glass. His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something heavier. Regret. A memory stirring just beneath the surface, waiting to pull him under. Back then, the office buzzed with life, a chaotic energy that felt more like home than the sterile silence of today. Papers cluttered desks, phones rang incessantly, and the faint smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air. It was a time when Ashley and Brad moved through the chaos like a well-oiled machine, their banter a constant soundtrack to the grind of fieldwork. They'd come in early to prepare, cracking jokes and bantering with the team. Ashley remembered being late that day, a rarity now, but more common back then. He rushed in, throwing his jacket over his chair, only to find Brad already holding court, a smile on his face. "Morning, sunshine. Hope you didn't hit snooze too many times," Brad teased, his broad shoulders practically blocking out the light as he leaned casually against the desk. "Don't get too comfortable, Brad," Ashley shot back with a grin. "I'm here to bring some real skill to this team." Brad's laughter boomed, and Karen walked past just as Ashley was about to fire back. She paused, placing a hand on Brad's chest, a fond look in her eyes. "Don't be late for dinner tonight, okay?" Brad's grin softened, and he covered her hand with his own. "Wouldn't miss it, honey." Ashley blinked, stunned. "Wait, you and Karen? Since when?" Brad shrugged, and the look in his eyes was softer than usual. "It just happened." Brad's grin widened, his tone turning almost poetic. "Told myself, if you can make her laugh, maybe she'll give you the time of day. But every time she laughed, I was the one who fell a little harder." Ashley laughed, shaking his head. "You've always had a way with words." "Maybe," Brad replied, a glint in his eye. "But Karen, she was worth finding the right ones for." Gabe looked at Ashley, the realization dawning. "Brad and Karen? I never would have guessed." Ashley's smile faded, replaced by a look of distant grief. "Yeah, they were amazing together." He took a slow sip as if bracing himself before continuing. "But back to what happened. We were tracking this guy, a real piece of work. Word was he'd been running a human trafficking ring out of this place, and many of the women, well, they were in bad shape, overdoses, violence. Brad and I decided to check it out, no backup. Figured we could handle it." "It was one of those places that felt wrong the moment we stepped in," Ashley said, his voice tinged with a mix of regret and unease. "The floorboards creaked like they were warning us to leave, and the smell. It wasn't just mildew, it was something deeper. Rot, maybe. Decay." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "We found this red door, out of place in a building like that. It led to a basement, the kind of place that felt like it hadn't seen sunlight in decades." Ashley took a deep breath. "The moment we walked down those stairs, I knew we were in over our heads. The smell alone, like something rotting." "What happened next?" Gabe asked quietly. The stairwell felt tight and claustrophobic, with each step drawing Ashley and Brad deeper into the shadowed depths of the old house. The air grew thicker, damp with the scent of mildew and something metallic, like rust or blood. At the bottom, Ashley placed his hand on the door handle, glancing back at Brad. Brad just grinned, his broad frame filling the narrow space behind him. "This isn't where I parked my car," he muttered, his usual glint of humor flashing in his eyes. Ashley rolled his eyes but couldn't help the faint smirk that tugged at his lips. He cracked open the door. As it swung inward, the two men froze, feeling the shift in the air as 20 heads turned, eyes locking onto them. They'd stepped into what looked like a gang's gathering place, a dimly lit room with concrete pillars casting shadows across the floor. The men inside didn't hesitate. In a heartbeat, guns were raised, and the silence shattered. The first shot shattered the silence. the crack echoing like a whip through the damp air. In an instant, the room erupted in chaos. Bullets tore through the dim light, slamming into concrete pillars and sending shards of stone flying like shrapnel. Ashley and Brad hit the ground hard, their movements instinctual. The air buzzed with the smell of gunpowder and fear, each breath heavy with the weight of survival. Bits of concrete burst around them as bullets struck the stone, filling the air with dust and grit. Ashley could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, each shot a reminder that they were vastly outnumbered. They weren't supposed to be here. They weren't supposed to find this. Brad crouched beside him, his face smeared with dirt, but he still wore that crooked grin. "How's that backup plan looking now, partner?" Ashley forced a grim smile. Could be worse. They could have run out of bullets by now. As if on cue, the gunfire slowed, the echoing clicks signaling empty magazines. Ashley and Brad took advantage, each raising their weapon and squeezing off shots, precise and controlled, downing a few of the men as they scrambled to reload. But it wasn't enough. As the last of their rounds fired, both men dropped their guns, and the room plunged into silence, only for a moment, but it was enough. Ashley heard Brad swear under his breath before fists and bodies surged toward them from all sides. Ashley and Brad braced themselves. The first punch landed hard, bone against bone, jarring Ashley's wrist. The sting barely registered before another fist slammed into his ribs, sharp and breath-stealing. Instinct took over, his body moving before his mind could keep up. No room for precision, just survival. The room was a blur of movement, each strike a ripple in the chaos. Ashley moved on instinct, dodging and weaving, feeling the strain in his muscles, the burn in his lungs. Beside him, Brad was a force of nature, every swing of his massive arms sending men stumbling back. But then, in a brutal second, he jerked forward, a grunt escaping him as a bullet tore into his leg. Ashley watched in horror as Brad staggered, his face tightening in pain. His pocket ripped and small silver coins tumbled out, scattering across the floor with a faint clinking. Brad's face twisted, but he nodded toward the coins. "Ash, get those!" he ground out, sweat dripping down his face. "Are you kidding me?" Ashley shouted, barely dodging a blow aimed at his temple. But he caught the look in Brad's eyes, a desperate, silent plea. Ashley dropped to his knees, his fingers scrabbling across the floor, scooping up the scattered coins even as the fight raged around him. Each one felt like a lifeline, his heart pounding with urgency as he shoved the cold metal pieces into his pocket. Ashley's fingers curled around the last coin, the cold bite of the metal searing into his skin like a brand. It wasn't just a coin anymore. It was a promise, a burden, a memory of a man who'd given everything to buy Ashley's chance at survival. And as he clenched it tightly, it felt heavier than it had any right to be, its weight pressing into him like the 1,000 lifetimes already told. When he looked up, time seemed to slow. Brad was on his knees, his broad shoulders sagging as two men yanked his arms back, binding him to a crumbling pillar. Blood seeped from his leg, pooling at his feet like a dark halo. His face was pale but defiant, his eyes burning with a mix of pain and determination. Brad's breaths were shallow, his face pale but defiant. "Run, Ash!" Brad's voice was raw, strained, like every word cost him something. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body trembling from the effort of staying upright. Blood pooled at his feet, dark and spreading, but still he held himself tall, defiant. "Get out of here," he rasped, the fight still. Flickering in his eyes, even as the light behind them started to dim. "Tell Karen, tell her." His voice faltered, the words slipping through his fingers like sand. But Ashley knew. He knew exactly what Brad needed him to say. Ashley shook his head, his entire body rebelling against the command. His steps faltered, torn between instinct and loyalty, between survival and the unbearable thought of leaving Brad behind. His throat tightened, his pulse hammering in his ears. "I can't leave you here," he choked out, his voice breaking under the weight of it all. Not like this. Brad exhaled a shaky breath, his lips barely curving into the ghost of a smirk. "Damn it, Ash," he muttered, his voice rough but steady. "If you don't go now, I swear." He swallowed hard, fighting to stay conscious. "I'll kick your ass myself." His fingers twitched, reaching toward Ashley, but never quite making it. "Do it," he forced out, his eyes locking onto Ashley's, fierce and firm. "Don't make this all for nothing." Ashley felt something inside him shatter. His jaw clenched, his breath came in ragged bursts, and for a moment, just a moment, he considered fighting, throwing himself into the impossible, refusing to let this be the end. But Brad's stare held him there, pleading without words, demanding without force. This wasn't a choice, it was an order, and Ashley had never disobeyed Brad before. With a final broken inhale, Ashley turned and ran. Ashley's throat tightened, his breath coming in shallow bursts as he edged toward the door, the oppressive weight of the room bearing down on him. Every instinct screamed at him to stay, to fight, to do something, anything. But Brad's stubborn gaze locked him in place. It wasn't just a look, it was a command, raw and silent, yet undeniable. Brad's eyes flicked to Ashley one last time, a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a desperate plea wrapped in unspoken words. "Go. Now." Ashley's trembling hand gripped the doorframe, his legs refusing to obey even as his mind screamed for him to move. That's when he saw him. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and impossibly still, his presence sucking the remaining air from the room. The man's face was a haunting canvas, pale and gaunt, his hollow cheeks casting sharp shadows under the dim light. Sunken eyes, pale as frosted glass, seemed to cut through the chaos, pinning Ashley in place with their eerie, restless intensity. Ashley froze, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. The man moved with deliberate calm, his gaunt hands steady as they grasped a weapon. The moment stretched unbearably, every detail burning into Ashley's memory. The way the man's skin, almost too smooth, caught the faint flicker of light. The quiet, controlled precision of his movements. The slight curl of his bloodless lips as he delivered the final brutal blow to Brad. Brad's body jerked violently. His ragged gasp floated through the air like a red balloon. Ashley's vision blurred as his chest tightened, his entire being screaming to turn back, to fight, to save the man who had always been his rock. But the silent command in Brad's dying gaze anchored him in place. The man straightened, his unhurried movements more chilling than the chaos that had just unfolded. Those lifeless eyes glanced up, locking onto Ashley for a split second, a moment that felt like an eternity, as if the man were silently marking him, cataloging his very soul. A shudder ran through Ashley as his survival instincts finally took hold. He turned and bolted, his footsteps pounding against the damp, creaking floorboards. Each echoing step felt like a betrayal, guilt clawing at his chest with every stride. But no matter how fast he ran, the image of Brad's lifeless body and the cold, haunting presence of that man burned into his mind, chasing him up the dim stairway and into the depths of his memory, where it would never fade. Once outside, Ashley stumbled to his radio, his voice shaking as he called in for backup. The world felt surreal, the faint hum of sirens growing in the distance as he clutched the coins, his fingers white-knuckled around them. When the team finally arrived and stormed the house, Ashley followed, dreading what he would find. As they reached the basement, his heart sank. Brad was chained to a pillar, his head slumped, the fight gone from his body. Ashley's vision blurred, but he forced himself to look around, needing to know if the people who'd done this were gone. The bodies of those they'd fought littered the room, but a sick realization crept over him as he scanned each face. Ashley's fingers brushed against his pocket, the metal cold and unforgiving against his skin. His pulse still pounded in his ears, the echoes of the fight refusing to fade. He clenched his fist around the coins, their familiar weight grounding him, but something was off. A flicker of unease crawled up his spine. He loosened his grip slowly, feeling the distinct edges, the ridges that for some reason had become second nature to him. 1, 2, 3. His stomach twisted. There should have been more. His breath hitched, and he looked down at his hand for the first time since escaping. The coins rested there, glinting faintly in the dim light, but it wasn't right. His mind raced, trying to remember, trying to retrace his steps. Had he dropped one in the chaos? Had it been knocked loose in the struggle? Or a sharp chill crept over his skin, or had the man taken it? Ashley's jaw tightened, his fingers curling protectively over the remaining coins. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as the realization settled deep in his bones. One was missing, and in that basement, as the sirens faded and the reality set in, Ashley felt the weight of the coins and the memory of his partner, a memory that he knew would follow him forever. Gabe let the silence stretch, sensing that Ashley needed the space to allow the memory to settle. The faint clink of glasses from nearby tables filled the gap, a fragile rhythm that seemed to match the weight of Ashley's words. Then he finally broke the silence, his voice steady. "I'm sorry, Ash. Losing someone like that sticks with you." Ashley nodded, taking a long sip from his glass. "I know it's been years, but seeing that young woman tonight, I don't know, it just brought it all back. She was vulnerable, stuck in her situation like Brad was in his, only this time I was there. I couldn't shake this feeling, like maybe I could have done more for him back then if I'd been better, faster, stronger." He shook his head, frustrated. Or maybe I just didn't see it coming. Gabe leaned forward, his gaze steady and his voice low, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen his own share of ghosts. "Ash, you gave him what he asked for. You trusted him to make the call. That's not failure, that's respect. And yeah, it hurts like hell, but it's not on you to carry all of it. You gave him his chance to be the hero he already was." Ashley exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing slightly, though his eyes held that lingering shadow. "Yeah, I know. It just feels like I let him down, like I'm carrying his weight somehow." Gabe reached across, clinking his glass gently against Ashley's. "Then let's carry it together. You don't have to go through this alone. Brad sounds like someone worth remembering, not someone you need to carry as a burden." Ashley let out a slow breath, his fingers tapping idly against the glass. "I don't know, Gabe. Maybe I should have fought harder. Maybe I should have—" He exhaled sharply, cutting himself off. "Doesn't matter now." He shook his head, swallowing hard before looking up. "But thanks. I don't know if I say it enough, but I'm glad you're here." Gabe offered a small smile. "Anytime, Ashley, and hey, here's to Brad." They raised their glasses in a quiet toast, letting the memory of Ashley's old partner linger between them, a silent reminder of the bonds that had shaped them, both the ones that remained and the ones that had been lost. Chapter 13, June 1st, 1998, 8:47 p.m. See each other again. The city exhaled the last breath of daylight, its skyline streaked with deep purples and ember-red hues that smoldered at the horizon. Below, the streets pulsed in their restless rhythm, the neon glow of half-flickering signs casting uneven pools of light onto the rain-slicked pavement. A bus hissed to a stop at the curb, its brakes wheezing like a dying breath before it lurched forward again, swallowed by the sprawl of motion. Laughter crackled from a nearby alley, sharp and sudden, but the sound twisted at the edges, too jagged, too hollow. The scent of charred meat from a street vendor curled through the damp air, masking something older, something stale, a mix of oil, sweat, and city rot baked into the concrete. The night stretched its fingers over the streets, the shifting shadows growing sharper, more deliberate. They clung to alleyways and doorways, seeping between parked cars like ink spilled across the sidewalks. Streetlights flickered to life, buzzing erratically, their glow fractured as pedestrians wove beneath them, their faces half lit, half hidden. It was a city that never truly slept, only slipped into something deeper, something hungrier, waiting for the ones who didn't know when to stop walking. Ashley and Karen walked side by side, but their movements were as out of sync as their unspoken thoughts. Ashley's shoulders hunched, his frame taut with a tension that seemed to vibrate in the cool evening air. Karen's sharp eyes cut toward him intermittently, her gaze catching the twitch of his jaw, the restless drumming of his fingers against the coins in his pocket. Every tap felt like a ticking clock, counting down to something she couldn't yet name. The silence between them was heavy, unspoken words hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. His hand stayed buried in his jacket pockets, his fingers absently tracing the edges of the coins he carried, a constant reminder of the weight he bore. Karen glanced at him from time to time, her sharp eyes catching the flicker of something unspoken in his expression. She said nothing, allowing him the silence she knew he needed. They turned a corner, stepping into a busier street where the city's heartbeat seemed louder. The glow of neon signs reflected off the rain-slick pavement, casting a kaleidoscope of colors onto the faces of passers-by. The scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor mingled with the faint tang of exhaust fumes. And then the moment broke, abrupt and electric. The crowd shifted around them, a tide of faces moving with purpose, when suddenly a sharp jolt knocked Ashley off balance as a man's shoulder slammed into him, the impact as deliberate as a knife thrust. Stumbling back, Ashley's thoughts fractured, his focus snapping to the retreating figure, a wiry man weaving through the crowd with unsettling ease as if he belonged to the chaos rather than moving through it. "Watch it," he snapped, his tone cutting through the din of the street. The man stopped, turning slowly to face him. His hood shadowed much of his face, but the faint glow of a nearby street lamp illuminated sharp cheekbones and a sly, thin smile. He was wiry, his movements calculated and fluid, like a shadow slipping through the cracks of reality, always just out of reach. "Sorry," he drawled, his voice low and almost teasing. His gaze lingered on Ashley, the corners of his mouth twitching upward as if he recognized him. Ashley's breath hitched, and for a moment time seemed to slow. A memory surged, vivid and jagged, the suffocating darkness of a basement, the sharp tang of gunpowder stinging his nose, and the deafening crack of gunfire splitting the air. Shadows moved in the chaos, and then Brad's voice, a fleeting shout swallowed by the noise. His chest tightened as the memory faded, replaced by the unsettling figure standing before him. For a fleeting second, the man's expression shifted. Recognition, satisfaction. It was impossible to tell, the flicker gone as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by an unnerving smirk that stretched too wide, like a mask slipping into place. "Problem?" the man asked, his head tilting at an angle that made the gesture feel unnatural, almost reptilian. His voice was slick with mock politeness, but the undertone coiled with malice like a snake poised to strike. The faint curl of his lips hinted at something darker, a challenge, an invitation. The way his gaze flicked over Ashley felt invasive, as if he were peeling back layers and searching for something hidden beneath the surface. Karen stepped closer, her stance subtly shifting to one of readiness. Her sharp features were unreadable, but her hand hovered near her hip. "Ashley," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You good?" Ashley's fists clenched at his sides, his pulse pounding in his ears. Another memory surged forward. Brad's laugh, a quip thrown over his shoulder, then a shout of pain. Ashley's jaw tightened as he stared at the man in front of him. Could it be? The man raised an eyebrow, his gaze flicking briefly to Karen before settling back on Ashley. His smirk deepened as he adjusted the sleeve of his coat with precise, practiced ease. "Breathe, detective. The city's full of moving parts. Some fall into place, others slip through the cracks. Who's to say which is which?" Ashley stepped forward, his movements deliberate, his voice dropping into a growl laced with barely restrained fury. "Have we met?" The words came out as both a question and a challenge. The man chuckled, the sound low and hollow, like wind brushing through a graveyard. "Maybe. Or maybe the world's just small enough for our paths to cross. Funny how fate works, isn't it?" He let his gaze linger on Ashley, his smirk twisting into something cruel. Shame about the big guy, though. Sometimes people get tied up. Tough break. The words hit Ashley like a physical blow, stealing his breath for a moment. His vision tunneled, and all he could see was Brad, the chains, the blood, the lifeless slump of his body. The man's laughter snapped him back to the present, rage surging through him like wildfire. Ashley's rage ignited in an instant. "You!" The words caught in his throat as he lunged forward, a burst of fury driving his movements. But the man was faster, already pivoting away, his laughter trailing behind him like a ghostly taunt. With a sharp laugh, the man darted into the crowd, his wiry frame slipping between startled pedestrians like smoke. "Catch me if you can, Detective Todd," he called over his shoulder, his voice laced with mocking glee. "Damn it!" Ashley growled, breaking into a sprint. His boots pounded against the pavement as he pushed through the throng of people, Karen close on his heels. The crowd blurred around him, the neon lights above casting fragmented reflections across his vision. The chase tore through the labyrinth of the city, twisting alleys and crowded intersections blurring as Ashley surged forward, his target weaving through the chaos like smoke curling away from grasping hands. His laughter, sharp and mocking, echoed off the brick walls, a cruel siren's call drawing Ashley deeper into the labyrinth. The burn in Ashley's legs spread like fire, but the rage driving him forward roared louder than the ache. But as they rounded a final corner, the alley ahead was empty, the only sound the distant hum of the city. Ashley skidded to a halt, his breath ragged and shallow. His fists clenched at his sides, the white of his knuckles stark against the dimly lit alley, a silent testament to the storm raging inside him. The rage inside him simmered, threatening to boil over as he scanned the shadows, willing the man to reappear. Karen caught up moments later, her breathing steady but her eyes sharp with frustration. She quickly scanned the alley, her jaw tightening. He couldn't have gone far. He had to have a way out planned. Ashley didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the empty alley as his mind replayed the man's words over and over. He knew everything. Karen placed a hand on his arm, her voice steady and grounding. "Ash, he's playing with you. Don't let him get in your head." Ashley turned to her, his eyes blazing with anger and frustration. "He knows what happened to Brad. He knows everything." Karen's expression hardened, her resolve clear. "And we'll get him. But not like this. He wants you to lose it. That's how he wins." Ashley exhaled sharply, forcing himself to take a deep breath. The weight of the coins in his pocket pressed against his hand, their cold metal grounding him. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice low and resolute. Karen gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. "No, it's not. But we'll do this the right way." As they turned back toward the main street, the city seemed oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. The hum of life continued around them, unbroken by the shadows lurking beneath the surface. As the crowd swallowed Ashley and Karen, the shadows shifted, peeling away to reveal a figure lingering just out of reach. His movements were deliberate, his presence as sharp as a blade drawn under moonlight. The faint flicker of a streetlight illuminated the curve of his twisted smile and the glint of something metallic in his hand. He lingered, watching, his voice barely a whisper against the night. "Soon," he murmured, the single word dripping with malice. His smirk widened, the weight of their names curling on his tongue like a promise. Ashley Todd, Karen Crow. He exhaled, savoring the syllables. "Now I know exactly who I'm playing with. We'll see each other again. Soon." Chapter 14. March 1st, 2000, 6:05 a.m. Who's there? The first rays of sunlight pierced through the blinds, cutting jagged patterns of light and shadow across the walls of Karen's small apartment. The muted hum of the city seeped through the cracks, a patchwork of distant car horns, muffled voices, and hurried footsteps echoing like a restless heartbeat. Inside, lavender pillows perched precisely on the bed, their soft hues clashing. With the stark white duvet, while the faint scent of extinguished vanilla lingered, a ghost of last night's fleeting calm. The room was neatly decorated, reflecting her practical yet slightly whimsical personality. The bed sat neatly made, its crisp white duvet stretched tight, untouched, as if sleep had barely disturbed its order. A knitted throw, deep navy with threads worn soft from years of use, was folded carefully at the foot of the mattress, a contrast to the rigid neatness of the space, a hint of something once loved, now clinging to routine. The walls held fragments of her life, framed photos capturing fleeting moments of happiness, abstract art that suggested a mind too restless to settle. On the nightstand, a well-worn leather journal lay beside a closed book, its pages dog-eared, waiting for a moment of attention that never seemed to come. Everything in the room was placed with precision, not for aesthetics, but for function. Yet beneath the carefully curated calm, something lingered, an absence, a weight pressing against the quiet. Karen stirred, the sharp ache in her side dragging her unwillingly into consciousness. The fight with John Doe etched itself into her body. Bruises mottled her ribs like dark, spreading shadows, and her muscles protested with every subtle movement. She grimaced, easing herself onto one elbow, her gaze drifting instinctively toward the nightstand. The first thing she saw was the picture frame. It was small, nestled between a sleek bedside lamp and a well-worn novel, its spine creased from countless late-night readings. Her fingers reached for it almost on instinct, lifting it carefully. The photo captured a moment that felt impossibly distant. Her and Brad at a local fair, frozen in time beneath the neon glow of carnival lights. His arm rested securely over her shoulder, his grin stretching wide as he triumphantly clutched an oversized stuffed bear, the spoils of a ridiculous drawn-out ring-toss battle. Karen's laughter was caught mid-motion, her hair tousled by the breeze, her cheeks flushed from a mix of crisp autumn air and the kind of happiness that once felt effortless. But it was Brad's eyes that held her attention every time, deep, steady, unwavering. Even in a simple photograph, they carried the weight of quiet reassurance, a silent promise she once believed would never break. Karen sat on the edge of her bed, the picture frame cool against her trembling hands. Her thumb hovered over Brad's smile, brushing the glass with quiet reverence. "You promised," she whispered, the words cracking as they left her throat. The room held still. Morning light crept through the curtains, softening the outlines of the space, wrapping her in a hush that wasn't quite comfort. She set the frame in her lap. It didn't feel heavy, but it stayed. A memory stirred, clear and sharp, rising from somewhere too deep to ignore. It didn't ask permission. It simply came, vivid as breath and just as impossible to hold. It had been one of those perfect autumn evenings where the air was crisp but not yet cold, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. The sky, streaked in hues of amber and deep blue, mirrored the nervous energy thrumming in Karen's chest. She hadn't expected to feel this way, hadn't expected Brad's easy confidence to disarm her so completely when he asked her out. Now, as she approached the small Italian restaurant he had chosen, she smoothed her hair for the 10th time, her fingers twitching at the hem of her jacket. It was ridiculous, she told herself. It was just dinner. But something about this night already felt different. When she arrived, Brad was waiting, leaning against a lamppost with the effortless ease of someone who had never once doubted she'd show up. His grin, broad, warm, and unapologetically infectious, lit up the fading evening light. "Hey," he said, straightening and holding the door open for her with a playful flourish. "Glad you made it. For a second there, thought maybe you'd come to your senses and stood me up." Karen smirked, slipping past him into the restaurant. "And miss out on free breadsticks? Not a chance." The restaurant was cozy and dimly lit, with soft yellow lights casting a warm glow over polished wood tables. The air was rich with the scent of garlic, roasted tomatoes, and fresh basil, a comforting invitation to linger. In the corner, a lone violinist played a soft, lilting melody, the notes threading gently through the murmur of conversation. Brad led her to a table near the window, pulling out her chair with an exaggerated flourish that made her laugh. As the evening unfolded, her initial nerves dissolved, swept away by Brad's easy charm. He had a knack for weaving humor into every story, his self-deprecating wit disarming her more with each passing moment. Between bites of pasta and sips of wine, he regaled her with tales from his childhood, like the time he convinced his little brother to jump off the roof onto a safe pile of leaves. Karen's laughter rang out, unrestrained, filling the small restaurant and drawing a few amused glances their way. She surprised herself by opening up too, sharing stories she rarely told anyone. Brad listened, really listened, his brown eyes fixed on her as if she were the only person in the world. He asked thoughtful questions, his interest genuine, and she realized with a start how easy it was to talk to him. As the night wore on, Brad leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter but still warm. "You know, Karen, I'm glad you said yes. I've wanted to ask you out for a while now." Karen raised an eyebrow, feigning nonchalance. "Oh yeah? What stopped you?" He grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Just didn't want to scare you off. You're kinda intimidating, you know." Karen laughed, shaking her head. "Me? Intimidating? You're the one built like a linebacker." "True," Brad admitted, his grin widening. "But you've got this thing, like you're way out of my league. Kinda like winning the lottery." Karen felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of flattery and disbelief. "You're ridiculous." "Maybe," he said, his tone teasing but his eyes severe. "But I mean it." And just like that, the laughter, the warmth, the flicker of candlelight was gone, replaced by the too bright morning sun and the sharp ache of reality, leaving Karen alone in the stillness of her room. The photo frame weighed heavy in her lap, anchoring her to the present. The warmth of her memories collided painfully with the cold truth of her reality. Brad was gone, the bruises across her ribs a fresh testament to her vulnerability. The faint vanilla scent turned sickly sweet, clinging to the air like a reminder she didn't want. A single tear broke free, sliding down her cheek before she brushed it away with trembling fingers. The ache in her side flared as she stood, placing the photo gently back on the nightstand. She crossed to the window, pulling the curtains open. The city stretched out before her, bustling and vibrant, indifferent to her grief. Karen inhaled deeply, her breath trembling as she forced her spine straight. The city outside hummed with indifferent energy, its harsh pace a stark contrast to the heaviness clinging to her. But the morning sun, cutting through the gray of lingering clouds, seemed to whisper a quiet reassurance. Life moves forward, even when shadows linger. The intercom's sudden buzz shattered the quiet, a jagged sound slicing through the stillness like a blade. Karen flinched, her breath catching as a jolt of adrenaline shot through her limbs. Her fingers clenched the edge of the nightstand, the cool wood grounding her against the unexpected intrusion. For a moment, she didn't move, just listened. The faint hum of the city outside, the distant murmur of a neighbor's television, the rhythmic ticking of the clock on her wall. Nothing else. Her pulse thudded against her ribs as she pushed off the nightstand, forcing her legs to move. The floor was cold beneath her bare feet, each step across the hardwood carrying her closer to the unseen presence waiting beyond the speaker. She reached the intercom, hesitating just long enough for the silence to stretch too thin. Then, voice measured but laced with unease, she called out, "Who's there?" Chapter 15. April 2nd, 2000, 10:16 a.m. Step towards something more. The hallway outside the interrogation room pulsed with restrained tension. Officers moved like clockwork, their footsteps soft against the linoleum, voices low and blurred into the mechanical wheeze of the coffee machine brewing its third pot. The air reeked of burnt grounds and overused cologne, the signature scent of too many long shifts on too little sleep. Ashley leaned against the wall in the interrogation room hallway, arms crossed in a posture that suggested boredom but didn't quite sell it. His gaze roamed constantly, never settling, fingers drumming a restless rhythm along his bicep. To most, he looked relaxed. To anyone who knew him, he looked coiled. He spoke in hushed, clipped tones with the captain, but his eyes kept scanning the hallway, sharp, calculating, as if waiting for something no one else could see. Gabe strode past, a thick manila folder tucked beneath one arm. Without breaking stride, he tapped Ashley's shoulder. "See you in there," he said, the corner of his mouth tugging upward in a dry half-smile before slipping through the interrogation room door. Inside, the room greeted him with its usual grim welcome. The walls were worn, their once sterile gray dulled by years of silence and confession. The single overhead bulb cast a tired glow, barely cutting through the dim. The air held the stale bite of sweat and old coffee, like tension that had settled in the walls and never left. Gabe dragged a chair back with a hollow screech and dropped into it, the folder landing with a soft thud on the scarred tabletop. Opening the folder, Gabe flipped through the pages with practiced precision. The file read like so many others, forks in the road taken too late, mistakes etched into paper by weary hands. His finger paused on a mugshot. A young man stared back, jaw tight with defiance, but there was something behind the eyes, something quieter. Not just fear, not just regret, something haunted. Gabe skimmed the incident report again, eyes narrowing. A street fight gone wrong. One man was dead. Another was missing by the time sirens arrived. Gabe stared at the scrawled note, his brow barely twitching. The ink was messy, like someone had written it fast and wanted to forget it faster. One name crossed out. Another, Broderick, left behind like a bruise. No rank, no role. Just a quiet suggestion that something else had been in play, something that didn't make the report. The door creaked open and 2 guards entered, escorting a disheveled young man into the room. His hair was unkempt, his clothes rumpled, and his eyes darted nervously around the space, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The guards guided him into the chair opposite Gabe and stepped back, their presence looming just outside the doorway. Ashley entered a moment later, taking his place in the corner of the room. His demeanor was calm, his movements deliberate, but his presence filled the space with a weight that made it hard to ignore him. "Wow," Ashley said, glancing at the file on the table. His voice carried just enough edge to make the young man shift uncomfortably in his chair. "That's quite the file, Mr. Michael Banks." Gabe looked up from the folder, his tone even but pointed. "Let's hope it explains how we got here." Mr. Banks shifted in his seat, his jaw locking in a failed attempt to project calm. The squeak of metal against tile betrayed his discomfort as he leaned back, his eyes darting to the detectives as though testing invisible exits. "You know what my father used to say to me?" Gabe asked, his voice measured but sharp enough to cut through the young man's feigned indifference. "Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future." Ever heard that one? Michael scoffed, the sound sharp and defensive, like a reflex honed from too many years of disappointment. His jaw tightened, and for a second, his eyes scanned a corner of the room as if chasing a memory he'd rather forget. "No," he said, voice low and bitter. "My father wasn't around." He leaned back in the chair, arms folding across his chest in a makeshift shield. "What's your point?" Ashley's voice came from the corner, calm but carrying a steel edge that made Michael's shield falter. "I guess you hung around the wrong crowd to end up here." Michael's composure cracked, his voice rising in defiance. "You don't know anything about my life." Michael scoffed, leaning back like he had all the time in the world. "Man, you're wasting your breath. You think I don't know what this is? You two sit here, playing good cop, bad cop, hoping I'll fold." Ashley's facial expressions didn't shift. He stayed leaning, almost casual, like he had nowhere better to be. "Good cop, bad cop?" He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "You're giving yourself too much credit, kid. You think you're the first tough guy to walk in here talking big? You're just another one trying to claw his way out of the gutter." "Really? Let's see. Star athlete, boxer with control, discipline, promise. People didn't just know your name, they expected it to mean something. He paused, letting the silence thicken. Your old coach once said you had the ambition to move nations, that you could have led, not just one, could have been a guardian, the kind of kid others followed without being told why. Then something shifted, practices missed. You started orbiting the kind of people who never cared where you were going, just what you could offer, and a couple of months ago you stopped wanting the weight that came with being seen. Really change your situation, make a name for yourself, but instead... Ashley straightened, locking eyes with Michael, his stare persistent. You stuck with pigeons. Michael blinked, his scowl faltering. Pigeons? He let out a scoff, but the bravado didn't quite reach his eyes. What the hell are you talking about? Ashley exhaled through his nose, shaking his head with a slow, measured disappointment. You ever watch pigeons in the city, Michael? Michael's fingers twitched, his teeth grazing his thumbnail as he frowned. What? Why would I? Ashley leaned in slightly, his voice calm but deliberate. Filthy little things, pecking at crumbs, clawing over each other for scraps, tethered to the ground, too afraid, or too damn small, to even dream of the clouds. He let the words settle, his lip curling with quiet derision. Now, have you ever seen an eagle, Michael? Michael shifted in his seat, the metal groaning under his weight. Yeah, he muttered, forcing himself to hold Ashley's gaze. What's your point? Ashley tilted his head slightly, considering him, then spoke, his voice lower now, like the slow turning of a knife. Eagles don't fight for scraps. They carve the sky. Powerful, persistent. They rise above it all, unbothered by the filth beneath. The pause between them was razor thin, tension thick in the air. Ashley took a step back, arms folding across his chest. His tone turned almost amused, but his eyes stayed sharp. You've been keeping company with pigeons, Michael, and the real question is... He let the words trail for a moment before delivering the blow. Are you one of them? Michael swallowed hard. His knee bounced under the table, his hands gripping the edge of his chair like the room was suddenly too small. Ashley watched him process the glance of something behind his eyes. Recognition, defiance, maybe even the first taste of regret. Gabe, silent until now, leaned forward, his voice measured but edged with finality. Birds of a feather, Michael. You sure you're flying with the right flock? Michael opened his mouth to retort but hesitated. The words hit harder than he'd expected, their truth cutting through his defenses. His jaw tightened again. His tone was defiant but quieter now. Like you've never made a bad decision. Ashley stepped back, crossing his arms as a faint smirk twinkled across his face. Before he could respond, Gabe leaned forward, his tone softer but no less resolute. We've all made bad decisions. No one's perfect. Mine? He paused, leaning back in his chair. Buying a motorcycle after my dad passed away. Thought it would help me feel free, but all it did was remind me of what I was running from. Ashley's voice followed, quieter now, edged with a raw honesty that cut through the room's tension. April 29th, 1996. Ashley's fingers curled into his palm, the date sharp against his mind like an old wound itching beneath the surface. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a turning point, one I can't take back, no matter how many times I replay it in my head. He didn't elaborate, but the weight of the date hung in the air like a shadow pressing against the room. Michael looked between them, his posture shifting slightly as his bravado began to waver. So what? You made your mistakes. I made mine. What's your point? Gabe's expression softened, but his words carried a quiet intensity. It's not about the mistakes, Michael. Everyone makes them. It's about what you do next. Own up to them. Make better choices. Don't let your past decide your future. Ashley nodded, his voice quieter now but resolute. Right now, you've got a choice to make. Stay down here with the pigeons or figure out how to rise above it. But that's on you. The room fell silent. the faint hum of the overhead light filling the space as Michael stared down at his hands. Ashley returned to his spot in the corner, his gaze steady but patient. Gabe leaned back slightly, his arms crossed, waiting. Outside the room, the guards shifted subtly, their silhouettes faint through the frosted glass window in the door. The air in the room was thick with unspoken possibilities, the weight of decisions yet to be made pressing on everyone inside. Michael's breath hitched, his chest rising and falling as he stared at his hands, fingers curling like they might hold answers buried in the creases of his palms. Silence stretched taut in the room, each second a loaded thread. Finally, his shoulders sagged, the weight of too many wrong turns pressing him into the chair. His throat worked as he swallowed hard, then finally, "All right," he said, the word brittle but resolute. "All right, let's talk." Gabe exchanged a brief glance with Ashley, a ghost of understanding passing between them. Then Gabe turned his attention back to Michael Banks, his focus steady and unwavering. The conversation was just beginning, but they all knew it was the first step towards something more.